Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were life-jacked.
What do you do when your life takes a drastic turn after you suffer from an injury? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Life Jack, the Resilience Podcast. Life Jack is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Katie Arnold, is an award-winning journalist, longtime contributor to Outside Magazine, and author of the acclaimed 2019 memoir, Running Home. A Zen practitioner and champion ultra runner, Katie teaches writing and running retreats exploring the link between movement and creativity, wilderness, and stillness. But in 2016, Katie suffered from a nearly career-ending injury while in the wilderness. Her writing has been featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, ESPN the magazine, Runner's World, and Elle, among others. Her new book, Breathe Splashing in the Phenomenal World, Zen and the Art of Running Free, is a spiritual guide, a classic adventure tale, and a philosophical quest into the ultra marathon of life. Much more than a guide to how to run, Breathe Splashing in the Phenomenal World is an exploration of how to be. Hi, Katie. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Rowe. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm doing great. I'm really excited to be on your show.
Yes, so I actually was an athlete. I ran track in high school, but you are, and I was a sprinter, so short distances. But you are what they call an ultra runner. So how did you get into running, and what exactly is ultra running?
So ultra running is any distance over a traditional marathon of 26.2 miles, of which, there was a high-profile one today in Boston. And ultra running is typically a distance of 50K or roughly 32 miles, 50 miles, 100K, 100 miles. And now they're starting to go up into the 200-mile range. And that's running straight, without in one go. You can stop, of course, but it's not like where you spend the night and get up and do it the next day. It's a continuous race. And so I got into running sort of by accident when I was very young. I was about 7, and my parents were divorced, and I lived a few states away from my dad. And whenever we would go to visit him, my dad, who was a very curious human and lover of outdoor and wilderness, he was like, hey, what do you think about running a 10K race? And he was always trying to think of fun things for us to do and different things. And I have an older sister, and we were like, sure. I mean, we had no concept what a 10K race was, 6.2 miles. And it was on a country road near his house. And so we entered that race just on a total lark. And we, walked, limped, practically crawled, and made it to the end. And that finish, though we finished, I'm sure dead last, was my first taste of that euphoria, doing something hard and the satisfaction and pride that you get when you do it. And so I ran that 10K, and then I went on to keep running. I never ran competitively, like in school on track or cross country, because my sister, who's older than me, got there first, right? And when you're the little sister, you're like, oh, I better do something different. So ironically, I never competed as a youth, but I ran all the time anyway. And for me, it was a private, personal thing I did. I loved it. I had a relationship with my body, with being outside, and most of all with my mind. Early, around the same time that I took up running, I realized I wanted to be a writer. And it's just when I would go out running around the neighborhood, I would make up stories in my head. And so I just saw by accident that the two were linked. So I've done it my whole life.
That sounds amazing. Again, when I first thought about ultra running and, of course, this is your passion, but all I can think about is the scenes from Forrest Gump where he just started running miles and miles.
Oh my gosh. Well, even as an ultra runner, we watched that movie recently with our daughters, and I was like, that is full on next level. That is not even ultra running. That is like intergalactic running. That is beyond. And yeah, I got into ultra distances. So I just always been a runner, had a running practice. But I got into ultra after my dad died, and he and I were really close creatively, emotionally. And I just was suffering from really acute anxiety after his death. And really the only thing that helped me kind of move through my grief was running in the wilderness, like in the mountains. And so little by little, I just realized I not only enjoyed being out in the mountains for long periods of time, but it felt natural in my body. And so that's when I started taking on ultras, not until my 40s.
Now, in 2016, you were injured while in the wilderness. So could you share what happened with the listeners?
Sure. Yeah, in fact, I actually was injured in the wilderness while on a river. So we were actually whitewater rafting. We were on a wilderness river in Idaho. And so my husband and I have always been people who love to be out in nature and in the wilderness, the backcountry. And we hike and backpack and backcountry ski in the winter. And one of our favorite ways is to go on river trips. So where we have our own raft and we pack it with gear and we're out for 3 or 4 nights at a time. And so in 2016, friends of ours got a permit to raft the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho, which is like one of the renowned whitewater rivers in the country, probably second only to the Grand Canyon. We hopped on the chance to go. And it's a really technical, lots and lots of rapids. It's a 100-mile stretch of river, which the number then will come into play later. But it's 100 miles of river with 100 rapids in those miles. So there's a rapid every mile and a major rapid. And we've had a lot of experience on rivers. We know how to read rivers and, raft them. And just in a fluke, on the very first day, we flipped our raft on a rock. And I was really badly injured. And we had to make the decision, do we stay on the river or do we try to evacuate out? And I didn't know that, I had shattered my leg, but that's what had happened. And I didn't know. And so I was in that state of shock/denial where you can kind of make up any story in your head and believe it. And so I was trying to go with it was soft tissue, or a friend of mine said, you dislocated your knee. And so we made the decision to stay on the river with the rest of the group. We thought it would be safer than trying to split up and kind of bash our way out of the wilderness. And so we were on the river for 6 days, and I was injured badly and had to stay in the boat, right? I couldn't fall out again, so it was high consequence and very stressful, but also this extremely sublime, beautiful canyon, one of the most beautiful canyons in the country. And so it was this mix of just exquisite beauty and the deepest pain and also kind of mental torment.
Yeah, speaking of mental torment, I was wondering 6 days, what was going through your mind? I mean, were you optimistic the entire time, or did you just have pessimistic moments here and there, or were you just whatever's going to happen is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was maybe the most Zen state I've been in. And by Zen, I mean focused totally on the present moment, right? Because if I thought into the future of not only what was going to happen, around the next bend in the river, if some huge, monster rapid was going to come up, or even 2 days down the river, because, we were not even probably 2 hours into the trip of a 6-day trip. So I had to stay so mentally focused on the present moment because it was too overwhelming to think about what was downstream, literally and metaphorically. And so I had to go into this state of just radical presence. It was a survival instinct. And I was I have to get through this rapid and then the next. And I was moved onto a boat that was bigger than our raft and by this older boatman who had run the river maybe, 10 times. And so he was don't worry, we'll get you down safely. And my husband had to row our boat by himself. And so I was so worried about him. But no, I was not optimistic the whole time. I mean, I really was in that kind of shock and fear place of like, what's going to happen? Have I damaged my leg forever? What's wrong? Will I fall out of the boat and get even more hurt? Did I make the right decision for the group? Because, when you're in the backcountry, if one person gets hurt, sort of the whole group is at higher risk. There's more to think about. And so it was really tumultuous, but at the same time, I knew I couldn't really think about any of that. I had to just focus and mentally focus so hard on just this moment I was in. And it really became like the start of my, true Zen experience. And I just called it one rapid at a time, which of course you could apply to anything in life, right? Any misfortune or accident or, bungle or anything you do that wasn't how you planned it. It's like, well, just take that rapid one at a time.
Wow, man. Well, I definitely want to talk about your book, Brief Flashings in a Phenomenal World.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it about and why did you write it?
So it's the story of this river accident and the aftermath. It's the story of the accident itself and sort of what unfolds on the river and kind of what we have to go through to make it out of the canyon. And then the aftermath of healing, not just my broken body, but my spirit, my mind had gone, it was easy to fall into that despair of like, oh my God, I'm never going to run again. And to be honest, my marriage, because that accident not only was a fracture in my leg, but it kind of cracked open my marriage. And to Steve, my wonderful husband, who had been rowing the boat. And when there's a trauma like that, it sometimes can expose sort of older resentments or traumas that as a couple you've stored away, right? And you kind of like paper over it. And then something like this, it's like a fault line opens and it exposes underneath. And, we'd been together 16 years by then. We had 2 young daughters at the time who are teenagers now. And, when I first met Steve, love at first sight, it's always been that way. But needless to say, when you're married for a long time, like assumptions creep in, kind of roles that maybe you never wanted to play, like societal expectations about gender roles. And so all of this came to the surface. And I needed to heal my marriage as well. And so the book's really that story and largely about how one of my biggest healing kind of teachers was Zen Buddhism. And I'm not a religious person, like it's not a religious doctrine to me, Zen. It's more of a way of life and being. It's just a way of being alive, I think, which is very present, open to what is rather than clutching to some future idea of what you want. There's a humility to it, which in Zen is often called beginner's mind, where you come to something just ready to learn something and not with all these preconceived notions of like, oh, I know how to do this. And so all of those ancient teachings are super simple. It's like common sense, but I had never heard them quite like I heard them when, after my injury, a friend gave me a book. And the book I reference quite a lot in Brief Flashings. But it's really like I felt like I'd stumbled upon like a secret guide to living.
I know for me, as I started reading the book, there was the ending sentence of chapter 1, Lessons in Falling. And I thought this is so interesting. You said, the sentence reads that you taught yourself how to run up mountains, but you did not know how to fall. Is there a good way to fall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, what I learned, and that's kind of this idea of Zen, is like not clutching so hard, not resisting, right? There's this idea, and you hear this across like a lot of self-help or sort of like wellness mindset stuff of like when you resist something, it persists and gets bigger. And that's really kind of at the heart of Zen Buddhism, which is like if you fight against suffering, because suffering is universal. So we all have ups and downs. We all have these adversities. But if we fight it or struggle against it, we just make our suffering worse. And so just on a literal level in the raft, and I describe this in the book in that first chapter of the raft gets pushed up against this rock. And again, we've done a lot of rivers, and normally when you get sort of bumped against a rock, you kind of pinball off. but this river was behaving differently, and it pushed us so that we were kind of like vertical against the rock. And my husband was the first to fall in the water, and he just fell, like he gave into the fall. Do you know what I mean? And I remember like clinging to the raft. It's like vertical in the water, you know, I'm like way up high. You know, picture like the Titanic going down, like on a much smaller scale, but like you're at the very top and you're like, no, you know, and I'm clutching against the boat so I don't fall. And honestly, I think part of the reason I got injured and he didn't, because as far as I know, I didn't hit myself on the bottom, right? I had no bruises. Like I didn't smash a rock. I clenched my muscles so tight, resisting falling, that I must have torqued my leg when I fell in. And so that really became this metaphor of that applies to anything. Like if you clutch to an idea that you have, or the story you've told yourself, or an outcome that you want to happen or don't want to happen, like you get so tight that you kind of miss all these other possibilities that might exist around it. And so I just apply it to everything, that falling, if you can allow yourself to fall with some kind of surrender. I mean, every scenario is different, right? But if you tighten against this adversity that's happening, you're likely to get more hurt or suffer more.
Oh, absolutely. Most definitely. Like you said, surrendering is the most difficult thing. I mean, we can teach ourselves to do these amazing things, right? I mean, you are able to run over 26 miles, right? 50 miles. You're able to do that. You have taught yourself the endurance to be able to do that. That is amazing. But it's just very interesting. However, trying to surrender to just falling, to fail, you know?
To fail, right. Surrendering to falling. And, you know, like I fall a lot when I run, and like I'll space out and I'll trip, or like I sometimes get behind on my calories and I need to eat more, and so I get lightheaded, and, you know, I'll just catch my foot on a rock. But the difference there is I don't know it's coming. And so I either, you know, can catch myself in an instant more often than not before I fall, or I just fall. But I don't have that like prolonged, like hanging on, like fighting it, you know? And so I think that just taking it metaphorically, like, when we can teach ourselves to surrender to the discomfort, the pain, the really difficult parts of life, like we move through them faster. I don't mean that we suffer shorter, or it's like we're Pollyannas and we put this like fake smiley face on things. No, I mean, we can genuinely suffer, but I think we do less harm to ourselves if we can find somewhere inside of us to just surrender. And that's really hard, because I do tell the story in the aftermath. I definitely had to use my mind to heal my body and my spirit. But that said, I was injured for a whole summer not walking. And at least a month or 6 weeks of that summer, I was kind of in that really dark place. So it's like you have to allow yourself the grace to be where you are, right? That is Zen. That is true Zen, of like, oh my God, I'm so sad today. I don't think I'm ever going to run again. Okay, I'm just here, right? And not to say you can't take action. Like I had a stationary bike in my backyard, and I took off one pedal and I just biked one-legged in place in my backyard. Not for fitness necessarily, but because I knew I needed movement and endorphins to lift my spirits. So you can take care of yourself at the same time that you're allowing yourself to grieve and be in the sorrow.
Yes. I definitely want to ask you, what was the healing process like for you?
It was, well, I'll just really quickly, the doctor, when I got home, again, I didn't know it was broken, and I got home and my doctor ordered an x-ray, and he called me the next day and he's like, you know, it's badly shattered and you're going to need surgery. And then I met the surgeon, a different doctor, and he was super dismissive and very curt. And he was just like, you know, you need to find another hobby, because if I were you, I would never run again. You know, like it's going to cause too much pain and damage and arthritis. And so that's a really devastating thing to hear. Yeah. And especially in the way it's delivered, you know, it was very authoritative, and I was in such a state of shock that, of course, when someone in a position of authority with a lot of expertise tells you that, it's really hard to to imagine a different scenario. So I had a lot of mental work to do to sort of move that prognosis out of my system and to replace it with a more open-minded, not necessarily optimism, but a belief that actually anything is possible. And I did that. Like, I just got this really radical mindset of possibility. I won't say like positivity or optimism, because I did have down days, but it was this mindset of possibility that like I would heal and I would have another chapter and I would make my own story. And I did simple things that no one taught me, but I feel like I want to share with your listeners, which is like if someone came up to me and wanted to talk about my accident, right? It was pretty traumatic and dramatic and everyone wanted to hear that story. But I didn't want to put my energy into telling it, because that, I think, put my body and my mind back in that trauma, state. And so I would, not be rude, but I would give up a tiny bit about the accident, and then I would shift the conversation to how I was healing myself. Like, I'm sitting outside all the time to get vitamin D, to heal my bones. I'm visiting with lots of friends, because you need friends and love and support to buoy you up. I'm riding my bike to keep my spirits up in the backyard. Like, whatever, I'm meditating to kind of be accepting of what is. And so I would just talk to them about the healing. And that was really mostly just talking to myself, reinforcing that I was healing. And then I have a really strong writing practice. And by that, I mean, I just write in a notebook, or you might call it a journal or a diary, a lot, most days. And I was writing like dreams I had about walking and running again. I would write kind of affirmations to myself, like and not in the future tense, like it was something that was going to happen, but it's like, I am healing now, right? So, and not even as a writer, like words make such a difference. And so I didn't want to say like, I will someday heal. I wanted to tell my body that I am actually in the process of healing myself now. And other little things like, people, doctors or healers who would try to give me PT or heal me, if they came at me with sort of this very typical attitude sometimes that running's so bad for us, I would just stop them and be like, you can't heal me if you bring that negativity. Do you know what I mean? And so I was just really aware of what messages I was absorbing or telling myself or being told.
Now, you mentioned that Zen is something that helped you. You discovered Zen. So can you explain a little bit about what it is for the listeners and how exactly did it help you?
As I said earlier, it's more of a philosophy of living rather than like a dogmatic religion. And it's not about sort of worshiping a god or following these strict rules. But I would say the essence of Zen is that we all suffer, right? We all go through difficulty, and we're all interconnected. So we all share, like no one is separate. We all go through this. And that the more we resist our suffering, the more we suffer. And the antidote, or the way to ameliorate our suffering, is to be in the present, right? Where instead of out in front imagining things, right, is to really just meet our life as it is. And it's really that simple. I mean, another way to put it, I love this, is one of the Zen teachers that I quote in the book, is like, his quote is, take care of your life. So that could be any kind of interpretation. Like, I love to think of it like when I come in the house, when I take off my shoes, like 9 times out of 10, I just kick them on the front porch and they're on this sloppy pile, right? And, you go to a Zendo maybe, and the monks have their shoes tidily lined up. It's as simple as that. It's just like, take care of things. Take care of yourself, take care of other people. And so a friend of mine who's a very wise Zen teacher and writer, she's actually a really well-known author herself. She wrote Writing Down the Bones. Her name is Natalie Goldberg. She's in her 70s, and we've been dear friends since my dad died. And she gave me, right after my surgery, a copy of this very classic book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, which is kind of like the most famous text in Zen in America. And it was written in the late 60s, early 70s by a monk who has since died, and he was Japanese. And it's a series of his talks, which in Zen are called Dharma talks, and he's just sharing his wisdom. And my friend Natalie gave it to me, and, we've been friends for a long time, and she handed it to me, and she was like, I'm just warning you, you're probably not going to understand it. And she meant that, like, this monk, Japanese, English was his second language. He's talking about sort of esoteric topics and teachings, and she wasn't really trying to insult me, but I got what she was saying. But I started reading it, and the minute I started reading it, I understood everything. And not because I understood Zen, but because I understood running and practice and kind of showing up over and over for yourself in that. And it is a resilience practice of showing up even through the discomfort, right? So in Zen meditation, like, that's pretty painful if you try to sit for an hour at a time, right? Your knees hurt. And so running is really the same. And I realized that anytime he wrote, sitting meditation, I could replace it with running, and we were speaking the same language. And so it became this guide to healing myself, to learning about Zen. And again, one of these principles of Zen is that of beginner's mind, which is coming to something fresh, and my accident had made me, whether or not I liked it, a beginner again, right? Because I didn't know if I would ever run again. And that's a scary place to be, but it's also really liberating, because I had to strip away all these ideas that I knew how to run, I knew what I was doing, that I had any idea that where I would end up. I had to come in just like newborn. And, again, when you're in that place, my doctor called it going back to zero. He was like, I'm going to take you back to zero. And he meant that in a bad way, like the pain was going to be so bad. But once I got through that initial shock, I started to see that zero was kind of a beautiful place. Zero is the place where you're starting over and anything is possible.
I love that. That's also one of the chapters in your book. So I love that.
Yeah. We fight the zero too, right? Like, that's another thing we fight and we resist and we struggle. Like, we don't want to fall into zero. But a lot of us have to at various points. And, if we have the right support, I mean, that's big, right? Like, we need support from other people and love and care. But if we have that support, a lot of times zero can be incredibly rejuvenating, and it's like a springboard into the next part.
Yes, for sure. So what are the key takeaways you want readers to have from brief flashings in the phenomenal world?
I mean, one of them is that our mind can be as strong, if not stronger, than our body. So the stories we tell ourselves and those narratives, like if we're like, oh, I'm never going to get ahead at work, or I'm always bad with money, or, I'm never going to run again. If we reinforce those narratives, like, it's much harder to break free of them. So watch how we're talking to ourselves. Watch, writing is a great practice to have. And you don't have to be, quote unquote, a real writer, right? Like, every single person has a story, and you can use your notebook, and it doesn't have to be anything special, just any old notebook you want to grab. If you start a writing practice, you can start writing in those ways where you are building yourself up, not in a fake way, not like a fake it till you make it. That's not what I'm saying. It's really honoring yourself where you are, and then believing that anything is possible. That's a line in my book, that when we come to that life with this open mind, this beginner's mind, that we really can exceed our wildest imagination. So to believe, it's like that Ted Lasso little sign in the Ted Lasso, so believe.
Yes.
And, also that we have the knowing inside of us. And I touch on this a lot in the book, but so a lot of, I think, what I was telling you about with my healing was intuitive or instinctive. Like, I was like, this just feels wrong when my physical therapist is literally like manipulating my leg while telling me that running is the worst thing you can do. Like, that was just intuition being like, you know what? Hey, that's not going to work. And so I was able to hear my intuition and listen to it and act from it. And we all have that knowing. Like, we are our own experts on our inner lives. And so it's really easy to get kind of told things by people, especially of authority, and you want to believe it. But I think that having like a stillness practice, which it could be meditation or just a quiet practice like walking, and certainly writing in your notebook, helps you see your intuitive voice. It helps you develop like an ear for listening to that, so that you can actually hear what your knowing self knows and your truth. And it's really easy to get distracted by our phones, by social media, by everything coming at us 100 miles an hour, so that we forget we know our own truth. We just need to remember how to listen. And brief flashings have lots of kind of ideas and sort of examples of how we can listen. Having a physical practice like walking or running or riding your bicycle. Nothing has to be extreme or competitive or ultra, right? You could just ride your bike around the block a few times. That helps you sort of sink into your body, quiet your mind, and you can hear yourself.
So in your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
I think having that beginner's mindset of sort of like dropping what you think you know and being open to what you might learn. So being very open-minded and like, gosh, every situation can teach me something. Even the worst, the most adverse situations, adversities can be opportunities, great, opportunities for growth and learning. The other thing is really having I guess I like to call it a physical practice, a creative practice, and kind of a stillness practice. So a physical practice can be anything where you're moving your body, preferably like outside in nature, where our senses just become naturally attuned to the birds, the weather, the clouds, the sound of our footsteps outside. And again, that's where we can kind of sink into our deepest center and like move from that aligned place. A creative practice could be anything like painting, art, cooking, writing is my practice. But that's where you can really sort of listen and express yourself through a creative practice, because we all have inner creativity, and that's, again, how we can tap into that knowing voice. And then some kind of stillness or quiet practice where it doesn't have to be meditation in the sit cross-legged kind of way. It could just be going for a quiet walk or, feeling your breath rise in and, down through your belly. But that, again, helps quiet our mind. We are such distracted humans now, and it's hard to hear ourselves, and it's hard to move and act from that place. So those are really important resilience tools for me, is to have those. And none of it has to be fancy. It doesn't have to take up, your creative practice could be 10 minutes a day. Your stillness practice could be 5 minutes a day. But to build in those habits, I kind of call them flow habits, because they're just ways that we can prime ourselves to be in those states of flow, which is sort of higher attentiveness, feeling of interconnection with all beings and ourselves, a state of awareness, and moving with ease, right? So not that resistance, that sticky fighting, life and its circumstances. And so that's kind of the flow habits. Those are my main flow habits. And I have others too. Community is a big one. Have friends, reach out, build a community, ask for help.
Wow, amazing. Well, I think you mentioned earlier that you've gotten back to running, ultra running. So what was it like getting back to it?
Amazing. I mean, I was really patient. And again, one of the big themes in Zen is not clutching to results. So not holding fast to this idea of what running would look like again, or, wanting it to be a specific way. So I had no expectations, which is freeing and is that kind of way of falling gracefully, right? It's it wasn't fighting against or for something. And so I got back to it slowly. Maybe after 6 months, I started running, and it took me a full year to get rid of that doctor's voice, who I joked that he was lived in my knee. And anytime it hurt or whatever, he would be like, I would never run again. And so I had to exercise him from my body. And when I ran again, it felt joyful and free. And, there were some days it hurt, but I think because I was so patient and I was so moving from the inside, from my own desires versus this feeling of how I should be, and I should come back and race, and I should be fast. I dropped all of that, because I was in that place of zero where I was I don't even know if I'm going to run again. So it was liberating. And then I slowly built up. And I was, a huge part of healing is listening. So I was just listening to my body, listening to my spirit. If I woke up in the morning wanting desperately to run up the mountain, I was okay, that means my body wants to go. And I just listened, and I moved from that listening place. And then little by little, I just ran more and more distances. And then as I write about in Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, 2 years after my accident, I entered and ran one of the toughest 100-mile races in the country in the mountains of Leadville, Colorado. And I won that race, like the biggest ultra in the country. And I was 45th. And I credit it fully to, what I call in the subtitle, running free, which, is free from expectation, free of pressure, free of society telling us how to be. It's really just being in your own true expression. And that was a huge joy. And then, of course, like anything, then there's the aftermath, right? Like in Zen Buddhism, it's like after the awakening, you have to like chop wood again. And so it's just like the trick is like you have this peak experience and it's like, okay, now I need to re-enter my life and kind of bring those learnings back into the here and now, this minute as a mother of 2 teenagers or whatever. So it's just this beautiful ongoing practice of being present and loving the highs because they're peak experiences. But really the title, Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, refers to those moments where we suddenly feel like we're part of everything and connected and everything is part of us. And those are beautiful, but also very ordinary moments. They're happening all around us all the time. It's not just winning a huge race. It's like, seeing your daughter asleep in her bed. Or the other night I was at a little birthday celebration for a friend, and my friend brought a poem and just read it aloud. And it was like, I was so touched. It was just felt like that, one of those flashing moments of like joy and wonder. And so those are always happening. And what we just really need to do is learn to pay attention and slow down and see them and capture them, because life goes by so quickly that they're really easy to miss.
Well, Katie, you are amazingly resilient, and I appreciate you, and thank you so much for your time. Can you do me a favor and let everyone know how they can get a copy of your book, Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, Zen and the Art of Running Free, or connect with you on social media?
Yes. I've loved talking to you about resilience because this is going to sound funny, but it makes me feel that I do have resilience, because sometimes even like when we live that way, like we can still doubt ourselves and so thank you for
Absolutely.
holding up a mirror. Like that also is so reaffirming. And I think that's a piece of resilience, is to find people in your life who can mirror back to you. And so thank you for that.
Oh,
people can find my book, Brief Flashings in the Phenomenal World, on Amazon, on all the online book outlets. I really encourage people to support their local bookstores as well. And independent bookstores are kind of the heart of our community. So if you have a indie bookstore in your neighborhood, please buy the copy from them. If they don't have it in stock, ask them to order it. They will do that, and no charge for the shipping. And so support local or buy online, whatever, is your gate, whatever suits you. Online, my website has all my information about my books, any media or podcasts I've done. You can read other writings I have, and that is katiearnold.net. And then I also write a Substack where I write weekly, and it's called Work in Process. So it's exploring like the process behind all the things I'm passionate about, right? A creative practice, a physical practice. So it's about art and sport and life and parenting and all the good stuff. And that's called Work in Progress. And that's at katiearnoldauthor.substack.com. I'm really active on Instagram, and that's just my name, at Katie Arnold. And then the last thing I wanted to say is that I do offer a couple of these amazing flow camps each year, and I have 2 coming up, one in late May, May 30th through June 2nd, outside Santa Fe. And these are all like very close to nature, beautiful settings, great trail access. We run or hike in the morning. You don't have to be a runner. And then we do guided writing in the afternoon and meditation. And beautiful locations, like this one's right on the Pecos River outside Santa Fe. And then I have one September 5 through 8 at this incredible alpine lodge, really high up in the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. And again, all comers are welcome. You don't have to be a serious runner or any kind of runner at all to come. And same with writing. We're all storytellers. And that information you can find on.
That is so amazing. Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the biggest one is just keep your eyes open. Walk through the world, looking around. That we live in a gorgeous place with beautiful humans, and it goes by way too quickly. So just take it all in, try to absorb it, see the flashings. And my biggest other thing is be yourself. I mean, that's kind of at the heart of Zen practice, is no one can be exactly you. And that is your light. And that is, in the Zen language, that's your enlightenment. And you already are an awakened being. And so just let it out, be you. And I love that one because it's just no matter what, just be you in the moment.
Well, Katie, I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rowe. I've really enjoyed this.
Hey, are you really loving this podcast, or did you really enjoy this week's episode? Then please subscribe, like, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. And remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.